Shavua Tov. Hope everybody enjoyed their Purim. And we're on Kuf Yud Dalet Amud Beis. Let's just review, as we say in Yiddish, Oisavedic, meaning outside. The Shaka V'Tarya here about Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish is a little bit concerned, shall we say, with the fact that in the Mishnah, when he has no other Yerakos for Tibul Rishon other than Chazeres, L'chora, there's no point to bringing out the second Chazeres as explained by the Mishnah. And the Mishnah says explicitly that they're going to bring out a second Chazeres for Tibul Sheni, when he already, L'chora, fulfilled his mitzvah of Maror with Tibul Rishon by eating the Chazeres. And Reish Lakish therefore derives the conclusion that mitzvah tzrichas kavana, and despite the fact that he did the physical external act of eating maror in the first tibul, nevertheless he did not fulfill his mitzvah of maror because it was his intention to fulfill the mitzvah of maror with the second maror after eating the matzah, al matzah sumrom yochlu. And therefore, if mitzvah tzrichas kavana, we understand very well that the first tibul was not l'shem mitzvah, and therefore, lacking kavana, he did not fulfill the mitzvah maror. When he fulfills the mitzvah maror on the second round, he has kavana l'shem mitzvah maror, and that's fine. But if mitzvahs einam tzrichas kavana, argues Reish Lakish, then we have a problem because he was yotzei the mitzvah of maror with the first tibul, even without kavana. And why would there be any need for a second tibul? Gemara explains that, you know what? Even if mitzvahs ain't tzrichas kavana, and even if I grant you that he was yotzei his mitzvah of maror with the first tibul without kavana, but nevertheless he needs a second tibul in order to create a hekera, to create a shinui that should be something strange in the fact that there are two tibulim, and that's going to arouse the curiosity of the children and facilitate the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, which requires Vigadatul Bincha, a question and answer between the son and the father. The Gemara says, if that be the case, then something is missing over here. And that is, if the Mishnah is telling me that you need two tibulim, one tibul for the mitzvah of maror, and another tibul for the hekera l'tinokos, then why does the Mishnah formulate that chiddush in terms of a case where for the first tibul he only has maror and he doesn't have any other yerakos? Why not just simply say that he does the first tibul with the yerek, a second tibul with maror, he'll fulfill his mitzvah of maror with the second tibul, and he has the kera because they're two different tibulim. Why did the Mishnah frame it in such a strange kind of a circumstance, a scenario in which he has no other yerakos for the first tibul other than maror? And it could be that Reish Lakish is really providing the answer to that question. The Mishnah wants to tell us an additional chiddush here that mitzvah tzrichas kavana, and he needs the second tibul for the mitzvah of maror because he didn't have kavana with the first tibul. So we could, in a sense, defend Reish Lakish and justify Reish Lakish's conclusion that the Mishnah is coming to be mechadesh that mitzvah tzrichas kavana. And that's going to explain and justify why the Mishnah set up the case of two tibulim in which both tibulim were in maror, or with maror, because he didn't have any other yerek. And the answer is the Mishnah wants to tell you that despite the fact that in the first tibul he ate maror, nevertheless he was not yotzi's mitzvah maror because mitzvah tzrichas kavana. And therefore, if there would have been a case where he had other yerakos for tibul rishon, had the Mishnah framed it in that case, then in fact, we would not be able to prove what we want to prove. Why? Because we could suggest the following, that the reason why, and in the Gemara's language, that Hecha De'ika Shar Yerakos, if the Mishnah would have addressed itself to a case where he has other Yerakos, then Trei Tibule, he needs Trei Tibule, and that is because he needs one Tibul for Heker Litinokos, another Tibul for the Mitzvah Morer, and he had a Yerek for the first Tibul to create the two Tibulim of a Heker. But Enochinami, we might come to the conclusion that if in an event that he only has one vegetable, that's Chazeres, that's all he has, then we might say there's no point to a second Tibul. And why? Because Mitzvah Ein Tzrichas Kavana, and he was Yotze with the first Tibul. So therefore, the Mishnah wants to teach us that, as Reish Lakish would have it, that Mitzvah's Tzrichos Kavana, and therefore, even though he had Morah and he ate Morah for the first Tibul, he was not Yotze the Mitzvah Morah, and he can still be Makdim and fulfill that extra Kiyum of Matzah first and Morah second to follow the sequence in the Torah of Al Matzah Morim Yochlu. And that's going to be the Chiddush, that the first Tibul, even though it was with Morah, was lacking in the critical element of Kavana, and therefore he needs two Tibulim. The first Tibul is going to set up the Hekera. It is a Tibul without Kavana L'Shem Mitzvah, Mitzvah Tzrichas Kavana. And the second Tibul is the Mitzvah Morah. Okay, now let's look at the Ode Tanya. This is where I think we stopped last time before Purim. Who can remember? It was so long ago. And let's see if we can find the Ode Tanya. It's approximately, shall we say, almost 20 lines down from the top of the Yomud. The first word in the line is Litinokos, on Daf Kuf Yud Daled Amud Beis. You have that? So at this point in the Gemara is going to try to prove from a Brisa the opposite conclusion of Reish Lakish. Namely, that mitzvahs ein tzrichas kavan. But you know what? I just want to add one more paragraph before we go on to the Ode Tanya. He has here in the Mesifta a paragraph on the top of Beis, and I say this for John, I don't know if you all have it, and it's a footnote number Yudalit. But before we get to the footnote, I think it's worthwhile that we read his commentary over here, which is to a large extent based on the Rashbam in the Sugya. And he says the following. And we're focused on the words Chazeres Lechuda, which is just a few lines above where we're starting V'Otanya. You'll see it. It's like if you count up from V'Otanya, 1, 2, 3 lines. You'll see Va'amal Chazeres Lechuda. I don't know why it's so dark here. Maybe I should open the windows. Just let me a second. Oh, maybe this is, I don't know if that's a little better, maybe. No, not much better. But anyway, now, he's trying to figure out the case where he had Shar Yerokos. And maybe if the Mishnah would have been framed in a case where he had Shar Yerokos, then we would have said, okay, if he has Shar Yerokos, I understand why he needs 2 Tibulim. Okay, let's just work with that premise. If it's Shar Yerokos, then he needs 2 Tibulim in order to generate both the combination, the combo of Heker Litinokos plus Achilas Moral Mitzvos, Mitzvos Achila. He needs 2 Tibulim. And he cannot be Yotze the mitzvah of Chazeres on the first tibul because he doesn't have Chazeres. But he says, Aval Chazeres lechuda lo boy trei tibule. Why not? Obviously, because he was Yotze his mitzvah of Chazeres with the first tibul. And he writes the following: Lo tzrichu shnei tibulim, v'pnei sheyetze mikach kilkul. It's a whole new element into the equation here. And we could be holding now mitzvahs ein tzrichas kavana. Not like Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish was insisting that mitzvah tzrichas kavana. The Gemara now is insisting that the possibility exists that mitzvahs ain't tzrichas kavana. And if he has only chazeres, then 1 tibul should be enough. Why is that so? And he says the following: that somehow, if we're going to require 2 tibulim, we run the risk of a kilkul, of something getting messed up. Why is that? Kevan shemitzas ein tzrichas kavana nimtzas shekshetivel tibul rish b'chazer krayotzi yidei achilus matzah kodem ikar zmana. The kilkul is that if you hold mitzvahs ein tzrichas kavana, he was yotze with the first tibul, and that was before the zman of the mitzvah, because the zman of the mitzvah is only after what? He eats the matzah. Then he writes, V'ein osim dover zeh mishum hekel tinokos lahaktim mitzvahs achilas moral lifnei zmana, meaning with all the respect to Shinui and Hekel Tinokos, that's not going to trump the kiyum of Achilas Mar Bismana. What's Achilas Mar Bismana? After he ate the matzah. And if you put the 2 on the scale, you've got Hekerel Tinokos on one side of the scale, and you've got Iker Zman Mitzvahs Achilas Morer on the other side of the scale, then the latter will trump the former. We might as well give up on Hekel Tinokos. Lahaktim es mitzvahs achilas morer lifnei zmano. So you know what we're going to do? We're going to push for the agenda of mitzvahs morer bismano, and then just drop the first tibul. As much as we would like to press forward for the first tibul, so that would set up the Heker L'Tinokos when he gets to the second tibul, we can't do so. We don't have the luxury of doing so because he doesn't have any other vegetables other than Mara. And what's going to happen is that mitzvah ain't tzrichas kavana. He's going to be yotzi his mitzvah of Mara with the first tibul. Shalom bismana. We can't allow that. Forget about Heker L'Tinokos. We'll find a different way. We'll start doing, we'll juggle knives in the air. I don't know what we're going to do. So now we're holding that here Reish Lakish made a big deal about why the Mishnah chose the case where he has no other vegetables, and Reish Lakish said because the Mishnah holds mitzvahs tzrichas kavana. No, forget that. Mitzvahs ain't tzrichas kavana. And you'll ask me, why did the Mishnah frame it in a case where he only had chazeres for a first vegetable for the first tibul? The answer is because we don't want to allow him to fulfill the mitzvah of Marar before the Zman, meaning before the Matzah. So at this particular point, we would say drop the whole Hekera business and let's limit it to the second tibul and completely drop the ball in the first tibul. It's called mashma law, and now the Mishnah wants to tell us a chidush. Dafka in the case where he has no other vegetable and he's going to do the tibul rishon. Bechazeres. Is afilu, even in this case of tibul rishon bechazeres be'inan shrei tibule, tihechi delehevi hekera letinokos. So what is the Gemara saying now? I understand the Gemara wants to defend the Mishnah, even if I hold mitzvah ain't tzrichas kavana. Is the Gemara just dropping the ball now on Iker Zman mitzvah achilas mora that should come before the matzah? And if you take a look at footnote number Yudalid, if you have that, Techias HaGemara on the third line, Sheish Chidush Afilu Shafilu Kishatibul Arishon B'Chazeres Tzarch Shnei Tibul. I guess that means Hekera L'Tinokos. But where is the mitzvah Mara? It sounds like the mitzvah Mara is in the first tibul. L'das Tosfos Sharaya Haisam Adua Mutar L'Chatchil L'Tabel Shnei Tibulim B'Chazeres Tchias HaGemara Hi Shaveh Mesorach Lachzor Achar Shayirokos El Shtar Mashmiya Shafilu Kshe'en Lo Shayirokos Yitval Pamayim B'Chazeres. Then he quotes the Ran. And it doesn't sit well with me. Why is he dropping the ball on this business about Zman, Iker Zman, Mitzvahs Mar? Why? And he doesn't even emphasize it. So I'm thinking, Rabos, I don't have a better answer, but what we did last week, if you recall, on number test, that's footnote number test on the previous page, the Aleph page, and that was the Meiri, that Ikar mitzvah hu b'mora nechal b'tibul sheni liachar matzah. See, again, the Meiri is talking about a case where he was Yotzei the mitzvah of Mora with the first tibul. And we discussed yesterday, when I say yesterday, I mean a week ago, whenever it was, that there are two dimensions to the mitzvah of Mora. And one dimension he fulfills with the mechanical act of eating Mora, and that takes place even before he ate the matzah. And we're holding now mitzvahs ain't shrichas kavana, so certainly he was yotze with the first tibul in an event that he had no other vegetable. Now he needs two tibulim mishum hakera. So why is the second tibul with Mora? I mean, if it was Yotzei, the mitzvah Mora with the first tibul, forget about the bracha issue. And I believe the answer is, according to the Meiri, that there's still another dimension, and he upgrades it to the Ikar mitzvah of Mora when he does it after the matzah, and it is integrated into the structure of the actual Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, such that we have two symbols of Avdus. We have the symbol of Lechem Oni with the matzah that he eats, and now we have the symbol of Lechem Oni of the Mora, and the two together integrate to form one greater whole called Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. And we quoted, if you recall, the Mishnah of Rav Gamliel later on in Kuf Tezayin, that Kol Shalom Shlosh Dvar Malolu Lo Yatzi Dechobas. All right. So let's start now with V'od Tanya. Now, just by way of introduction, we have something called D'mai. Normally, if there was no Afrashas Trumas of Maisrus, it's called Tevel. And that's an Isur Chamur to eat Tevel. The Rabbanan said that even if you have doubts about whether or not the Trumas of Maisrus were taken off, and you purchase these grains from an Amoretz, you're going to assume that you're going to have to be mafresh Trumas and Maisrus. Don't rely on the Amoretz who sold you the Tvua. Many of the Mochrim out there, unfortunately, are not mafresh Trumas and Maisrus. They don't have, a hechsher to the hechsher. Don't bother with them. And if you're going to buy from this Amoretz out in the shuk, then make sure to be mafresh, even though it's possible that the Trumas and Maisrus were already taken off. And that's called D'mai. Oh, now we have an interesting question. let's say you buy a yerek, or specifically maror, from an amoritz, and Trumas Yerokos is at the very least, a rabbinic requirement, but you bought it from an amoritz. It's D'mai. Can you be Yotze, the mitzvah Mora, with D'mai? With Chazeres, that's D'mai. Ochel and D'mai Yotza. What's going on over here? He buys Mora from an Amoritz, and it's D'mai, and he wasn't Mafresh Trumas and Maisros, and now he eats it for the mitzvah Mora? How could this be? D'mai is awesome. Now we have here a case of, let's call it mitzvah Ba'av Aveira. So we're going to have to say something here about D'mai. D'mai is not exactly Teva. Even on the Drabana level, after they instituted the Takana that you chayv to be mafresh from D'mai. D'mai is a chovas hafrosha, but it's not Teva. It's not what you would call a cheftzah di surah. If it's not a cheftzah d'isur, so what kind of isur is it? It's an isur gav. And I'll prove it to you. Aniyim are allowed to eat tamai without being mafresh. If it's an isur cheftzah, then that cheftzah is also to everybody, whether you're an ashir or an ani. You're chayav to be mafresh on tamai. So why the difference between an ani and an ashir? An ani, let's say, he doesn't have enough money to support his family for a year, whatever it might be, he's allowed to eat mai. And could you imagine allowing an ani to eat nevela, treifa, shkotzim, v'ramasim? Impossible. Why then is he permitted to eat mai without trumas and maisros? And the answer is that Tamai is not an Isur Cheft. There's nothing in the object itself that is us. The Rabbanan established that you have a Chovas Gavra to be Mafresh, Trumas and Maisros. But it doesn't generate a status of Tevel and Chefta di Surah on the Dmai that you purchased from an Amoritz. And in this case, he bought Chazeres. Okay, fine. So you want to tell me that T'mai is not a Chefta di Surah? How do you know that? Maybe we're going to say that the Rabbanan allowed an ani to eat T'mai without afrosha. But what about an ashir? An ashir is not allowed to eat T'mai without afrosha. It's like, imagine buying in the Shuk Machne Yehuda, there's no hechsher, there's no tudas hechsher, it's T'mai. You have to be mafresh shumas and maisers. I'm an ani. What do you mean you're an ani? You're not an ani, you're an ashir. And the ashir buys chazeres from an amoritz, wants to use that chazeres for the mitzvah of Mara. So here we have something called migu. Have we discussed migu? I don't remember if we spoke about migu. The fact that an ani could eat dumai means that even an ashir has some element of heter and achilus dumai, and that's called migu. Now, the concept of migu has a literal translation, but ma'od mat'eh, you can very, very easily slip and misunderstand. Migu means that every ashir could make himself into an ani by being mafkir his nechas. So I'm giving up all my nechas. He has possession of nothing. So he became an ani. And that Dmai is now mutter to him. Okay. But let's be honest with you. The Osher is not going to be mafkir his nechas. I once, as a child, was present at a moment of an usher being mafkir something. I was probably about 10 years old, and it was Rosh Hashanah. I don't know if the owner of the candy store knew anything about Rosh Hashanah. I don't even remember whether he was Jewish or not. He took all his baseball cards that he sells, put them in a box. Anyone who wants to come and take it. A friend of mine whispers this to me in shul on Rosh Hashanah. I was a 10-year-old boy. We ran out of shul on Rosh Hashanah. I grabbed that much of baseball cards that were hefker. I don't remember where I hid them over the course of Rosh Hashanah. I wish I had one of those cards today. Maybe they'd be worth something. So now we're saying that the Ashir could theoretically eat Demai if he was mafkir his nechasim. Well, come on, let's call a spade a spade. Let's be honest about it. What are the chances that an Ashir is going to become an ani? Just to eat a vegetable? Demai? Probably has a lot better things to do with his money and his time. But the answer is that proves that Demai is kind of mutter in potential for everyone, even for an Ashir. And when the Rabbanah required Afrosha, it was a Chovas Gavra, you do the Mais Afrosha. But as far as the Chefta is concerned, inherently it's a Chefta De'atera. They never converted, the Rabbanah never transformed the Chefta of the Irakos into a Chefta D'Isura. And Demai is not a Chefta D'Isura. He calls it here in the Mesifta, he uses the term Chumras Chachamim. Okay, yeah, but that's kind of vague. I think we said it much better. It's not just a Chumras Chachamim, it's an Iser Gavra without an Iser Chefta. And the Chefta itself is inherently mutter, and therefore could be used for a mitzvah, and it's not called mitzvah baba avera. In this case, for the mitzvah mara. Do you see any kasha in Reish Lakish? Okay, let's go on. Acholon below miskaven. Now we're getting closer to Reish Lakish. Here's another case which is enumerated in this list of the Bryce of cases where he is Yotze, the mitzvah of Mara. Not only in the case of Tmai, but also in the case where he ate it without kavanah l'shem mitzvah. If you ask me, right here, this is where the hatchet falls, and this is the kasha, the bomb kasha against Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish is of the opinion mitzvah srichas kavana, and if he didn't have kavana, he wasn't yotze the mitzvah. So here it says ochel b'lo miskaven yatza. The Brisa goes on record explicitly as maintaining that mitzvahs einam srichas kavana against Reish Lakish, who says that mitzvahs srichas kavana. And now the Brisa continues, Achon lechatzoin yotza. What does that mean, chatzon? A half a zayis? Can you be yotze with a half a zayis of matzah? So if you take a look here, he says the following: Achal tchila kishir chatzi zayis, v'chazar v'achal kishir chatzi zayis. He really ate a full zayis, piecemeal, one after the other, chatzi zayis and then another chatzi zayis. Because achilus mitzdarfos l'shir kizayis, yeah, but that requires what's called tokidei achilus pras. Within a short amount of time, he ate the second chatzi zayis of mar. Ubilvad shelo yisha bein achil chaverto yosef b'kidei achilus pras. But the Brisa says that if you eat mar without kavana, you yotze, and that's against Reish Lakish. The Brisa maintains that mitzvahs einom tzrichas kavana, and Reish Lakish maintains that mitzvahs tzrichas kavana. You know, whenever there's a kasha from a Brisa on a particular Amora, because an Amora can't disagree with a Brisa. Brisa is Tanoik, and an Amora doesn't have the luxury of I disagree with the Tana. That's the strict distinction between the Tanoim and the Amoraim. But this case that we're dealing with now is a little bit different. Reish Lakish didn't come up with his theory like a rabbit out of the hat. It wasn't his own original position that mitzvah srichas kavana. He was telling us that according to our Mishnah, mitzvah srichas kavana. Doesn't mean that that's the be-all and the end-all. You find a Brisa, okay, the Brisa is entitled to its own opinion. But Reish Lakish says, I'm interpreting the Mishnah. Don't ask me a kash for a Brisa. Okay, a Brisa is entitled to its opinion. And that's what the Gemara says, Tanoi. Now, Tanoi is a very kind of, what phrase can I use? You know, you always have like a spare joker card in your back pocket. Okay, you know, you have a question, I'll tell you it's a Tanoi. And in this case, Reish Lakish is really pushing Tanoi because he thinks he has a proof from our Mishnah that mitzvahs srichas kavana. And if you're quoting a Brisa that holds mitzvahs ain't srichas kavana, that's a plugta, that's a machlokas Tanoi. But that's not enough. Because as a general rule, in light of a Brisa, we interpret a Mishnah. The Brisa is quoted in order to put the Mishnah into a certain framework. And what this Bryce is telling us is that in our Mishnah, he was Yotze with the first Tibul because he ate Chazeres. And mitzvahs ain't tzrichas kavana. So the Achlon below Miskaven Yotza in the Brisa is coming to shed a light on our Mishnah. And even though mitzvahs ain't tzrichas kavod, he needs a second tibul. Yeah, he needs a second tibul. Yeah, because of Hakera Latinokos, as we saw earlier. Ude ka'amrit trei tibul lomali kiechid lehevi. Yeah, okay, fine. Or alternatively, the way Reish Lakish would have it, he's only yotze the mitzvah of matzah with the second, the mitzvah of mara with the second tibul, because mitzvah tzrichas kavana. No. The Bryce is saying mitzvah ain't tzrichas kavana. You have the wrong interpretation of the Mishnah. And if you'll ask me, mitzvah ain't tzrichas kavana, why do I need a second tibul? Because the Mishnah wants to be mechadish. I'm not worried about the Iker Zman mitzvahs achilas mor. I don't care. Let's get the mitzvah of mor finished up with the first tibul, and we'll forget about the matzah and that whole business about the time sequence. Unless Reish Lakish could come up with a very solid basis for concluding that mitzvahs tzrichas kavana, then we'll assume mitzvahs ain't tzrichas kavana. So the answer is Tanoi. This is where we need Tanoi. Tanoi doesn't mean that we're going to reinterpret the Mishnah based on an Amora and set up a machlokas between the Mishnah and a Brisa that's interpreting the very same Mishnah. What we're going to have to do in Tanoi is to prove black on white that there is a machlokas Tanoim about this very point. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Afal pi shetibel bechazeres, mitzvah lohavi lefon of chazeres becharoses ushnei chav tshila. Says the Gemara to defend Reish Lakish, I'm going to show you a brisa of Rabbi Yossi. Your brisa says that Afal pi shalos kaven yotza comes along Rabbi Yossi in another brisa, and he's entitled to his opinion to disagree with the brisa. He only has chazeres. That's the only Eric he has. And therefore he implemented Tibul Rishon b'chazeres. Nevertheless, mitzvah lahavi lefanav chazeres b'charoses. I'm agreeing with you that in this case he did the Tibul Rishon b'chazeres. He didn't have another Yerek, but nevertheless, mitzvah lahavi lefanav chazeres v'charoses. And that's what we saw in the Meiri, that the Iker mitzvah of Marar is the Mar you eat within the framework of Zecher Liavdus, namely Sipri Yetzias Mitzrayim, we'll call it Maskal B'Gnus, and that's the Mar you eat after the matzah. So what's Rabbi Yossi saying? Afal pi. Look, listen to the language. Afal pi shetibel bechazeres. His first tibel was bechazeres. We still need a second tibel, and that he calls mitzvah. Means he wasn't yotze with his first chazeres, with tibel rishon. Why not? And the answer is Reish Lakish. Namely, mitzvah strichas kavana. We have Rabbi Yossi now, and Reish Lakish can stand on the shoulders of Rabbi Yossi. We have a Tana who holds mitzvahs strichas kavana, and even though he only had chazeres for the first tibul, he will fulfill the mitzvah mar with the second tibul, because mitzvah strichas kavana. He writes here, "Umuchach mi divrei Rabbi Yossi sha'ochel chazeres b'tibul rishon lo yatzo yedei chovas matzah chovas mara." Because what? Because mitzvahs tzrichas kavana, you didn't have kavana, and b'tibul sheni. Now they're going to bring him the mara a second time around, and now he's going to have kavana l'shem mitzvahs mara. But wait a second. Let's calm down a little, Berzon. You know, you're getting a little carried away here. What did Rabbi Yossi say over here? Rabbi Yossi said, "Afal pi shetiva v'chazeres mitzvah lahavi lefonim chazeres, etc." A second time round of chazeres. Does that prove that Rabbi Yossi holds mitzvah strichas kavana? Maybe. The second chazeres is for a different purpose entirely, for the purpose of hekel tinokos. You can't prove that Rabbi Yossi holds mitzvah strichas kavana because he requires a second tibul. We already went through this with Reish Lakish. We put Reish Lakish over the coals. We slugged up Reish Lakish. He was yotzei the mitzvah of Marar with the first tibul. Vakati mimai dibul kasor Rabbi Yossi mitzvahs ein tzrichas kavan. Why do you need a second tibul? We already went through this already. What's going on? You need a chazara. Hi, the boy trade to tevi kerel tinokos. The second tibul is a kerel tinokos. But again, you know, the Gemara is being very blind over here, so to speak. The Gemara is asking a question without even reading the text. Look at the text of Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi says mitzvah. What does it mean? Mitzvah. He brings the second chazeres as a mitzvah. It's not a kerel tinokos. Would you use the word mitzvah to describe a kerel tinokos? Then that would be a very improper, imprecise choice of language. The word mitzvah means for the mitzvah of chazeres, the mitzvah of Marar. Why wasn't he yotzei the mitzvah of Marar with the first tibul, which he implemented with chazeres? The answer is, says Reish Lakish, because mitzvah tzrichas come on. What it says, "Im kain my mitzvah." So let's just the shackle of a tie in this Gemara going back and forth. The Gemara thinks that you have nothing here, Reish Lakish, to stand on. You're going to try to tell me that the reason why the Mishnah framed its case where he only had one Yerek, namely Chazeres, he had no other Yerakos, is to teach me that he's not Yotze with the first Tibul, because Mitzvah Srichas Kavanah. Says Gemara, what are you talking about? The reason why the Mishnah frames it in a case where he only had one Yerek is because you might have thought that he shouldn't even do the first Tibul, because Mitzvah ain't Srichas Kavanah, and then he's going to forfeit the Kiyum of Achilas Mar Bismana after the Matzah. And furthermore, we have a brisa that says, Achlan below Miskavin Yatza. Once again proving that Mitzvah ain't Srichas Kavanah. So from our Mishnah, we can hold Mitzvah ain't Srichas Kavanah, but despite the possible kilkul here, because he'll be Yotze with the first matzah, with the first marar, before matzah. And the Mishnah says, you know what? That's not top on our agenda. Go ahead, be Yotze the mitzvah marar with the first marar, because mitzvah ain't Srichas Kavanah, and add a second tibul of Chazeres only for the purpose of Kedei Shetehevi Heker L'Tinokus. But what are you going to do with the brisa of Tamai? And with the brisa of Tamai, the only possible solution here to defend Reish Lakish is to try to bring another Tana who says Mitzvah Srichas Kavanah. And that's going to be Rav Yossi and the other brisa who says you have to bring out the Marah as a mitzvah, not as some sort of acrobatics here, to get the child stimulates curiosity. Forget about all that. We need the Marah for l'shem mitzvah. In my mitzvah, the fact that Rav Yossi requires the Marah and Tibul Sheni for a mitzvah, it means Rav Yossi holds mitzvah srichas kavanah. Okay, then. So let's just make a note to ourselves where we want to pick this up in Mitzvah Hashem tomorrow. And we have footnotes number Tesvav through Yud Ches. Okay, then, let me make sure we have that, because otherwise we can easily forget about it.